The old house at the end of Green Street had been empty for 3 years. It stood behind a broken iron gate with tall grass growing in the yard and dust covering every window. People in the town said it was bad luck to go near it. Children crossed the street when they walked past it. But for 25-year-old Samir, this house was not scary at all. It was his grandfather's house, and now it belonged to him. Samir had received a letter from a lawyer 2 weeks ago. The letter said that his grandfather, Hassan, had died and left the house to him. Samir had not seen his grandfather in almost 10 years. His father and grandfather had a big fight long ago, and after that, the family never visited the old man again. Samir always felt sad about this. He remembered his grandfather as a kind man with white hair and warm hands. And he remembered sitting on his lap and listening to stories about faraway lands, hidden caves, and ancient kings. Now Samir stood in front of the house with a small bag on his shoulder and a rusty key in his hand. The evening sun was going down behind the trees and the sky was turning orange and pink. He pushed the gate open. It made a loud sound that broke the silence of the street. He walked through the tall grass and reached the front door. He put the key in the lock and turned it. The door opened slowly. The smell of old wood and dust hit his nose immediately. He stepped inside and looked around. The living room was full of old furniture covered with white sheets. There were books everywhere, on shelves, on tables, on the floor. His grandfather had loved books more than anything. Samir walked through the room and touched the dusty covers. He saw books about history, geography, languages, and travel. Some of them were in languages he could not even read. He went to the kitchen. There were old cups on the shelf and a teapot on the stove. Everything looked like his grandfather had just stepped out and would come back any minute. Samir felt a strange sadness in his chest. He wished he had come to visit the old man before it was too late. He decided to sleep in the house that night. He cleaned a small bedroom upstairs and put his bag on the bed. The room had a window that looked out over the backyard. He could see the moon rising above the trees. It was quiet, very quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a person hear their own heartbeat. The next morning, Samir began cleaning the house. He wanted to fix it up and maybe sell it later. He started with the living room. He pulled the white sheets off the furniture and opened the windows to let fresh air in. He swept the floors and dusted the shelves. He worked for hours. In the afternoon, he moved to his grandfather's study. This room was the most interesting one in the house. The walls were covered with maps from all over the world. There were maps of Africa, South America, the Middle East, and places Samir had never heard of. There were compasses, old telescopes, and strange metal tools on the desk. His grandfather had been a professor of history, and he had traveled to many countries when he was young. Samir began organizing the desk. He picked up old papers, letters, and notebooks. He found photographs of his grandfather standing in front of pyramids, temples, and mountains. In one photo, Hassan was very young, maybe 30, standing with a group of men in a desert. They were all smiling and holding shovels. It looked like they were digging for something. Samir turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written in small letters, "The search begins. Valley of Stones, 1971. He stared at the words for a long time. Valley of Stones. He had never heard his grandfather talk about this place. He looked through more papers and found a notebook with brown leather covers. It was old and worn. He opened it carefully. Inside, his grandfather had written pages and pages of notes. The handwriting was small and neat. Samir read the first page. "I believe I have found proof that the lost treasury of King Dawood exists. Once the old texts speak of a valley surrounded by red mountains where the king hid his gold before the Great War. The locals call it the Valley of Stones. I will go there this summer with my team." Samir's heart began to beat faster. A lost treasury? A king's gold? He kept reading. The notebook was like a diary. His grandfather wrote about his journey to the valley, the difficulties of the trip, the heat, the sand, and the dangers. He wrote about finding old pottery and coins. He wrote about a cave they discovered behind a waterfall. But then the entry stopped suddenly. The last page had only one line. "They do not want us to find it. We must leave. But I have hidden the map. One day someone will finish what I started." Samir closed the notebook. His hands were shaking. He looked around the study at all the maps on the walls. His grandfather had hidden a map to a king's lost treasury, and it was somewhere in this house. He stood up and looked at every map on the wall. He took them down one by one and checked behind them. Nothing. He checked inside the books on the shelves. Nothing. He looked under the desk, behind the furniture, and inside drawers. He searched for 3 hours but found nothing. Then, just when he was about to give up, he noticed something strange. One part of the wall behind the desk looked slightly different from the rest. The paint was a tiny bit darker, as if someone had fixed that section at a different time. Samir knocked on it with his knuckle. It sounded hollow. His heart jumped. He grabbed a small knife from the desk and carefully began to cut along the edges of the dark patch. The plaster came off in pieces. Behind it, there was a small hole in the wall, and inside the hole, there was a rolled-up piece of old yellow paper tied with a red string. Samir pulled it out with trembling fingers. He untied the string and unrolled the paper on the desk. It was a hand-drawn map. It showed mountains, a river, a path through a forest, and at the very end, a mark in red ink shaped like a star. Next to the star, his grandfather had written one word, "Here." Samir stared at the map. He could hear his grandfather's voice in his memory, telling stories about treasures and adventures. He had always thought those were just stories, but now, holding this map in his hands, he realized something that changed everything. The stories were real. Samir did not sleep that night. He sat at his grandfather's desk with the map spread out in front of him and the leather notebook open beside it. He read every page of the notebook again, slowly this time, writing down important details in his own notebook. He learned that the Valley of Stones was in a remote area near the border of two countries, deep in a mountain range that very few people ever visited. His grandfather had gone there in 1971 with a small team of 3 other men. They had found the cave, but something had gone wrong. Someone had warned them to leave. Someone dangerous. The notebook did not say who these people were. His grandfather only called them the Watchers. He wrote that they had been following his team for days before finally showing themselves. They told Hassan and his team that the valley was forbidden and that they must never come back. Hassan had no choice but to leave. But before he left, he secretly made a copy of the map they had used to find the cave. That was the map now sitting on Samir's desk. By morning, Samir had made a decision. He was going to find the Valley of Stones. He knew it was crazy. He was not an explorer or a professor. He worked at a small bookshop in the city. He had never traveled to any wild or dangerous place. But something inside him was pulling him toward this adventure. Maybe it was the memory of his grandfather's stories. Maybe it was the sadness of never saying goodbye. Or maybe it was simply the excitement of doing something that mattered. But he could not do this alone. He needed help. He needed someone who knew about maps and old places and how to survive in the mountains. He thought about this for a long time, and then he remembered someone. Her name was Nadia. Nadia was his old university friend. She had studied archaeology and now worked at a museum in the city. She was smart, brave, and a little bit wild. She loved old things, old buildings, old stories, old languages. If anyone would believe this map was real, it was Nadia. Samir called her that afternoon. At first, she laughed. She thought he was joking. But when he sent her photos of the map and the notebook, she went quiet. She called him back an hour later. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Her voice was serious now. "In my grandfather's house, hidden in a wall." "Samir, this notebook mentions King Dawood's treasury. Do you know what that is? Historians have been looking for it for over 100 years. Well, most people think it is just a legend." "My grandfather did not think it was a legend," Samir said. There was a long pause. Then Nadia said, "I am coming to see you. Do not show this to anyone else." She arrived the next day. Samir picked her up at the bus station. She had not changed much since university. Short dark hair, sharp eyes, and a backpack that looked like it weighed more than her. She walked fast and talked faster. At the house, she spent hours studying the map and the notebook. She used her phone to compare the map with modern satellite images. She matched the shape of the mountains and the river on the map with real locations. After a long time, she looked up at Samir with wide eyes. "I think I found it," she said. "The valley is real. It is in a very remote part of the mountains, on about 4 days of travel from the nearest town. No roads go there. We would have to go on foot for at least 2 days. Can we do it? Samir asked. It will be hard, and possibly dangerous. We do not know who these watchers are, if they are still there. That was over 50 years ago. They are probably gone. Nadia shook her head slowly. If they have been guarding that place for centuries, 50 years is nothing to them. They spent the next week preparing. Nadia used her connections at the museum to get more information about King Dawood and the legend of his treasury. According to old texts, King Dawood had ruled a powerful kingdom over 1,000 years ago. When enemy armies attacked his land, he ordered his most trusted men to hide the kingdom's gold, jewels, and sacred objects in a secret place. The king died in battle, and the location of the treasury was lost forever. Many people had searched for it over the centuries. None had found it, or if they had, they never told anyone. Samir sold some of his grandfather's old books to get money for the trip. He bought supplies, food, water bottles, ropes, a tent, warm clothes, and a first aid kit. Nadia brought tools for digging and measuring, a compass, and a powerful flashlight. She also brought a camera to document everything they found. On the morning they were supposed to leave, something happened that almost stopped the whole plan. Samir found a note pushed under the front door of the house. It was written on plain white paper in neat handwriting. It said only 6 words: "Do not look for the valley." Samir showed the note to Nadia. She read it and looked at the door, then at the street outside. And there was no one there. The street was empty and quiet, just like always. "Someone knows," she said quietly. "How?" "I did not tell anyone except you. Maybe someone saw you cleaning the house. Maybe someone has been watching this house for years, waiting to see if anyone would find the map." Samir felt a cold feeling in his stomach. The Watchers, could they still be out there after all this time? He looked at the note again. The paper was new and white. The handwriting was modern. This was not something from 50 years ago. This was from now. Someone alive, someone close, was warning them. For a moment, Samir wanted to stop. He wanted to put the map back in the wall, lock the house, and go back to his quiet life at the bookshop. But then he looked at the photograph of his grandfather standing in the desert, young and full of hope, and he knew he could not quit. His grandfather had been forced to stop, but Samir had a choice, and he chose to go. "We leave today," he said to Nadia. "Right now, before whoever wrote this note can do anything else." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Good. Let us go find a king's treasure." They packed their bags, locked the house, and left through the back door. They walked through the backyard, climbed over the old fence, and disappeared into the narrow streets behind Green Street. They did not see the dark car parked at the end of the road, and they did not see the man inside it, watching them through the window, speaking quietly into his phone. "They are leaving," the man said. "They have the map." There was silence on the other end. Then a voice replied, calm and cold. "Follow them." The journey to the mountains took 2 full days by bus. Samir and Nadia traveled through flat farmlands, then through small dusty towns, and finally into a region where the land began to rise and the air became cooler. The bus dropped them at a small town called Mirpur, the last stop before the wilderness began. From there, they would walk. Mirpur was a quiet place with only a few hundred people. There was one main road, a small market, a tea shop, and a mosque with a green dome. The people there lived simple lives, farming, raising goats, and selling wool. They looked at Samir and Nadia with curious eyes. Strangers did not come to Mirpur very often. They stopped at the tea shop to rest and plan their route. Nadia spread the map on the table and compared it with the satellite images on her phone. She pointed to a narrow path that went north from the town into the mountains. "This path follows the river," she said. "If we walk along it for about 30 kilometers, we should reach a place where the river splits into 2. The map shows the valley is to the east, past the second branch of the river." 30 kilometers through mountains," Samir said. "How long will that take?" 2 days, maybe less if the path is clear." The old man who ran the tea shop overheard them talking. He came to their table and looked at the map. His face changed. The smile disappeared from his eyes, and he shook his head slowly. "You are going to the Red Mountains?" he asked. "Yes," Samir said. "Do you know the area?" The old man sat down heavily in the chair across from them. And he looked at them the way a father looks at children who are about to do something foolish. I know the area, he said. My father knew it too, and his father before him. People do not go to the Red Mountains. Not anymore. Why not? Nadia asked. The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke in a low voice. Many years ago, some men came to this town. They were from the city, educated men like you. They asked about the Red Mountains. They wanted to find something there, something old. Samir and Nadia looked at each other. This had to be about his grandfather's team. What happened to them? Samir asked. They went into the mountains. 3 of them came back after a few days. They looked afraid, very afraid. They packed their things and left the town that same night. They never came back. And the 4th man? Nadia asked. When the old man looked at her. There was no 4th man. Only 3 went, and only 3 came back. Samir felt confused. His grandfather's notebook said there were 4 men in the team, but the old man was saying only 3 came to Mirpur. Maybe the 4th man had joined them later, or maybe the old man's memory was not perfect. It was a long time ago. What were they afraid of? Samir asked. The old man shrugged. They did not say, but I was a young boy then, and I saw their faces. I have never forgotten. Whatever they found in those mountains, it scared them very badly. He stood up and looked at them seriously. My advice to you is simple. Do not go. There is nothing in those mountains worth dying for. But Samir and Nadia had come too far to turn back now. They thanked the old man, paid for their tea, and left the shop. They bought extra food and water from the small market and started walking north along the river path before the sun reached its highest point. The first few hours of walking were beautiful. The path went along a wide river with clear blue water. The mountains rose on both sides, covered with green trees and gray rocks. Birds sang in the trees, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Samir felt like he had entered a different world. The noise and stress of the city seemed very far away. But as they walked deeper into the mountains, things began to change. The path became narrower. The trees grew thicker and darker. The river became rougher, with water crashing over rocks and making loud sounds that echoed against the mountain walls. They had to climb over fallen trees and jump across small streams. By evening, they were tired and their feet were hurting. They set up their tent near the river. Nadia made a small fire and heated some food. They ate in silence, listening to the sounds of the forest around them. The wind in the trees, the water in the river, and somewhere far away, the cry of a bird they could not see. Do you think the old man was right? Samir asked. About being scared? Nadia poked the fire with a stick. Your grandfather was scared too. He wrote it in the notebook, but he also wrote that the cave was real. The things he found were real. Something is out there, Samir. Whether it is treasure or danger, we will find out. They slept that night with the sound of the river in their ears. Samir dreamed about his grandfather. In the dream, Hassan was standing at the entrance of a dark cave, holding a lantern. He was looking at Samir and saying something, but Samir could not hear the words. Then the lantern went out, and everything was dark. He woke up suddenly. It was still night. The fire had died down to small red coals. Nadia was sleeping in her sleeping bag. Everything seemed normal, but something had woken him up. A sound. He lay still and listened. There it was again. Footsteps. Not the sound of an animal. These were human footsteps, slow and careful, moving through the trees near their tent. Samir held his breath. His heart was beating so loud he was sure whoever was out there could hear it. The footsteps stopped, then silence. Long, heavy silence. Samir reached over and gently shook Nadia's shoulder. She opened her eyes immediately, alert like a cat. He put his finger to his lips and pointed toward the trees. She understood. She reached slowly for the flashlight beside her. They waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Nothing. Then Samir heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, very soft, almost like a whisper, coming from the darkness outside the tent. Turn back. That was all. Just 2 words. Then the footsteps started again, moving away quickly, disappearing into the forest. Samir and Nadia sat in the dark tent, looking at each other with wide eyes. Someone was out there. Someone had followed them from the town, or maybe even from the city. The watchers were real, and they were close. Nadia gripped the flashlight tightly. Her jaw was set firm, and her eyes were hard. "We keep going," she said. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already. They are trying to scare us." "It is working," Samir whispered. Despite the fear, they did not leave. They stayed awake until the sky began to turn gray with the first light of morning. Then they packed their things quickly and continued walking north. The valley was still a full day's walk away. Whatever was waiting for them there, they would reach it by tomorrow. But now they walked with their eyes always looking back, checking the shadows between the trees, listening for footsteps that did not belong to them. The mountains, which had seemed so beautiful yesterday, now felt like they were closing in around them, watching them with 1,000 invisible eyes. By the second afternoon in the mountains, Samir and Nadia reached the place where the river split into two branches. The map showed it clearly, one branch going west and the other going east, like the arms of a giant letter Y. Now, they needed to follow the eastern branch. According to the map, the Valley of Stones was about 5 more kilometers beyond this point, hidden behind a wall of red rock. The eastern path was much harder. There was no clear trail anymore. They had to push through thick bushes, climb over sharp rocks, and cross the river 3 times using large stones as stepping points. The water was ice cold and moved fast. One wrong step, and they would be swept away. Nadia went first each time, testing the stones before stepping on them. Samir followed, gripping his heavy backpack straps and trying not to look at the rushing water below. They did not hear any more footsteps or voices since that night at the tent. But Samir could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time a branch moved or a bird flew up from the trees, his heart jumped. Nadia seemed calmer, but he noticed she kept checking behind them too. In the late afternoon, the landscape changed suddenly. The green trees and bushes ended, and the ground became dry and rocky. The mountains ahead of them were red, deep, dark red, like dried blood. They stood tall and sharp against the blue sky, and between them was a narrow opening, just wide enough for 2 people to walk through side by side. "That is it," Nadia said, pointing at the opening. Her voice was almost a whisper. "The entrance to the valley." They stood there for a moment, looking at the red mountains. There was no sound here. No birds, no wind, no water. Just silence. Heavy, thick silence, like the mountains were holding their breath. They walked through the narrow opening. The walls of red rock rose high on both sides, blocking most of the sunlight. The air was cool and damp. Their footsteps echoed against the stone. Samir felt like he was walking into the mouth of some giant sleeping animal. After about 10 minutes, the narrow passage opened up into a wide valley, and when Samir saw it, he stopped and stared. The valley was beautiful. It was a large flat area surrounded on all sides by the red mountains. In the middle, there was a small lake with water so clear you could see the stones at the bottom. Around the lake, there were green plants and wildflowers, blue, yellow, and white. It looked like a secret garden hidden from the rest of the world. But the most amazing thing was the stones. All around the valley, there were hundreds of tall stones standing upright in the ground. They were arranged in circles and lines like a giant pattern. Some were as tall as a man, and others were even taller. Each stone had markings carved into it, symbols, pictures, and words in a language Samir had never seen. "This is incredible," Nadia breathed. She was already pulling out her camera and taking photographs. "These stones are ancient. They could be over 1,000 years old, maybe older." Samir looked at the map. According to his grandfather's drawing, the cave was on the far side of the valley, behind the lake, at the base of the tallest red mountain. There was a small waterfall marked on the map, and behind the waterfall was the cave entrance. They walked across the valley, passing between the standing stones. Samir could not help touching them as he passed. The stone was smooth and warm under his fingers, as if it had been baking in the sun for 1,000 years. The carvings were deep and clear. Some showed pictures of people carrying boxes on their shoulders. Others showed a man wearing a crown, sitting on a throne, King Dawood. They reached the far side of the valley, and there, just as the map showed, was a small waterfall coming down from the mountain. The water fell about 10 meters into a pool of rocks below. Behind the falling water, Samir could see a dark opening in the rock. "The cave," he said. Getting behind the waterfall was not easy. They had to climb along the wet rocks at the side, holding on to the mountain wall for balance. The water sprayed on them, making everything slippery. Nadia almost fell once, and Samir grabbed her arm just in time. Finally, they squeezed through a gap between the waterfall and the rock wall and stood at the entrance of the cave. Nadia turned on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and showed a tunnel going deep into the mountain. The walls were smooth, not natural. Someone had carved this tunnel a very long time ago. They walked inside slowly. The air was cold and smelled old, like earth and stone. The tunnel went straight for about 20 meters and then turned to the left. When they turned the corner, they both stopped. In front of them was a large room carved out of the red rock, and in that room, stacked against the walls, were wooden boxes. Dozens of them. Some were broken open, and Samir could see what was inside. Gold coins, golden cups, necklaces with colored stones, and small statues made of bronze and silver. In the center of the room, there was a large stone table, and on it sat a golden crown decorated with red and blue jewels. Samir could not speak. He could not move. He just stood there, his flashlight shaking in his hand, looking at a king's treasury that had been hidden for over 1,000 years. "Your grandfather was right," Nadia whispered. Her eyes were shining in the flashlight beam. "It is all real." Samir walked slowly to the stone table and looked at the crown. It was beautiful. The gold still shone even after all these centuries. The jewels caught the light and threw small colored dots on the cave walls. He thought about his grandfather, a young man standing in this exact spot 50 years ago, seeing the same thing. He wished Hassan was here now. Nadia was already documenting everything. She took photographs of the boxes, the coins, the statues, and the walls of the cave, which had more carvings on them. She was moving carefully, or trying not to touch anything. "This is one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in 100 years, she said. "We need to contact the authorities. This needs to be protected and studied properly." Samir nodded. She was right. This was not just treasure. This was history. This was the story of a kingdom, a king, in a war that happened 1,000 years ago. It belonged to everyone. But before they could make any plans, they heard a sound that came from the tunnel behind them. Footsteps, many footsteps, coming toward them. Samir and Nadia turned and pointed their flashlights at the tunnel entrance. Shadows moved on the walls, growing larger as the footsteps grew louder. Then one by one, figures appeared in the opening. There were 5 of them. They were dressed in dark clothes and their faces were covered. Only their eyes were visible, and those eyes were cold and hard. The man in front stepped forward. He looked at Samir and Nadia, and then he looked at the treasure behind them. When he spoke, his voice was the same calm, cold voice from the darkness outside the tent. "We told you to turn back," he said. "Now it is too late." Samir's body went stiff with fear. The 5 men stood at the entrance of the cave room, like dark shadows, blocking the only way out. The leader, the one who had spoken, was tall and broad. His eyes above the cloth covering his face were steady and unblinking. He looked at Samir the way a hawk looks at a mouse. "Who are you?" Samir asked. His voice came out weaker than he wanted. The leader did not answer right away. He looked around the cave room at the wooden boxes, the gold and the crown on the stone table. And then he looked back at Samir. "We are the keepers of this place," he said. "Our families have guarded this valley for 40 generations, since the time of King Dawood himself." Nadia stepped forward. She was scared, Samir could tell, but she hid it well. "You are the Watchers," she said. "The ones who sent my friend's grandfather away 50 years ago." The leader's eyes moved to her. "Your friend's grandfather was a good man. He understood when we told him to leave. He respected our duty, but you did not listen to our warnings." "We did not come here to steal anything," Samir said quickly. "We came because my grandfather spent his whole life thinking about this place. He believed in it. I wanted to see if his dream was real. And now you have seen it. The question is, what will you do with what you know?" Samir looked at Nadia. She looked back at him. This was the moment that would decide everything. He thought carefully before speaking. "My friend is an archaeologist," he said, pointing to Nadia. "She works at a museum. She believes this discovery belongs to the world. Not to us, not to you, but to everyone. This is the history of a civilization. People deserve to know about it." The leader was quiet. The other four men behind him shifted slightly but did not speak. There was a long, heavy silence in the cave. Then the leader did something unexpected. He reached up and pulled the cloth down from his face. He was an older man, maybe 60, with deep lines on his dark skin and a short gray beard. His expression was not angry. It was tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. "My name is Tariq," he said, "and I am the head of the keepers. My father held this duty before me, and his father before him. We have protected this valley since the days when King Dawood's last general gave us this task. He told our ancestor, 'Guard this place until the right time comes.'" "The right time?" Nadia asked. Tariq walked slowly into the cave room. He went to the stone table and looked at the golden crown. He touched it gently with respect. "Our oldest stories say that one day someone would come who would not want the gold for themselves. Someone who would want to share it with the world. Someone who would understand that these objects are not just valuable. They are sacred. They are the memory of our people." He turned and looked at Samir. 50 years ago, your grandfather came here. He was a good man, but he came with others who only wanted fame and money. We could see it in their eyes. So we sent them away. But your grandfather was different. He argued with his team. He said the treasure should go to a museum, not to private collectors. They disagreed, and that is when we stepped in. Samir felt something shift inside him. He had always wondered why his grandfather had given up so easily. Now he understood. Hassan had not given up. He had been protecting the treasure from his own team. He had hidden the map not just from the Watchers, but from the men he had traveled with. Men who would have sold the treasure for their own profit. "My grandfather hid the map because he wanted the right person to find it someday," Samir said slowly. "Someone who would do the right thing?" Tariq nodded. "Tashi, and here you are." The tension in the cave began to change. The four men behind Tariq relaxed. One of them uncovered his face. He was young, maybe the same age as Samir, with kind eyes and a shy smile. The others followed. They were not soldiers or criminals. They were ordinary men, farmers, shepherds, and fathers, carrying out a promise made 1,000 years ago. Tariq sat down on a stone near the wall and let out a long breath. "We have been waiting a very long time," he said. "Guarding this place is not easy. We live in the nearby mountains. We watch the paths. We keep outsiders away. Our children grow up knowing the secret. It is a heavy thing, keeping a secret this big for this many years." "You do not have to keep it anymore," Nadia said gently. "Let us help you. I have connections with universities and national museums. If we can make sure this treasure is handled with care and respect, it will be studied, preserved, and displayed for the public. Your people's story will be told. King Dawood will be remembered." Tariq looked at his men. They exchanged glances and small nods. Then the young one spoke for the first time. "Father, I think the time has come. The old general said we would know when it was right. I think this is right." Tariq smiled at his son. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. He turned to Samir and Nadia. "We have one condition," he said. "Our people must be part of this. Our story must be told alongside the king's story. We are not just guards. We are the last living link to Dawood's kingdom. That must not be forgotten." "It will not be forgotten," Samir said. "I promise." They spent the rest of that day and the next documenting the cave. Nadia photographed every object, every carving, and every symbol on the walls. Tariq and his men told them stories passed down through their families. Stories about King Dawood's wisdom, his love for his people, and the great battle that ended his kingdom. Stories that no history book had ever recorded. Samir sat by the underground lake in the cave and wrote everything down in his grandfather's leather notebook. He filled the empty pages that Hassan had left blank. It felt right, like he was finishing a conversation his grandfather had started long ago. When they finally left the valley 3 days later, they walked out through the red mountains with Tariq and his son beside them. The sun was bright, and the sky was the deepest blue Samir had ever seen. He turned back once to look at the Valley of Stones. The tall carved stones stood silent and patient, just as they had stood for 1,000 years, waiting for this moment. 6 months later, the discovery was announced to the world. It made headlines in every country. Archaeologists called it the most important find of the century. A team of experts from 3 universities arrived at the valley to begin careful excavation and study. Tariq and his people were recognized as the hereditary guardians of the site. Their village received funding for schools and clean water. Their story was told in documentaries, books, and newspapers. The golden crown of King Dawood was placed in the National Museum, in a special room built just for it. Beside the crown, there was a photograph of an old man with white hair and warm eyes. On the sign below it read, Professor Hassan, the man who first discovered the treasury and chose to protect it until the world was ready. Samir stood in front of that photograph on the opening day of the exhibition. People moved around him, talking excitedly, taking pictures, reading about the history of the kingdom. But Samir was quiet. He looked at his grandfather's face in the photograph and smiled. "I finished your story, grandfather," he whispered. "I hope I made you proud." He put his hand in his pocket and felt the small, folded piece of old yellow paper he still carried with him everywhere. The map from the wall. It had led him across mountains, through fear, and into a cave full of gold. But the real treasure, Samir knew, was not the gold or the jewels or the crown. It was the journey. It was the promise kept across generations. It was the simple, powerful truth that some stories are worth finishing, no matter how long they take. He turned away from the photograph and walked toward the exit where Nadia was waiting for him, already planning their next adventure. The sun was shining through the tall windows of the museum, and the world outside was full of stories still waiting to be found. 3 months after the museum exhibition opened, Samir's life had changed completely. He no longer worked at the small bookshop in the city. Instead, he spent his days at his grandfather's house, which he had decided to keep and turn into a small research library. He filled the shelves with Hassan's books, organized his maps, and framed the old photographs. People from the university came to visit and study the collection. A journalist called for interviews. Samir's quiet life was gone, and a new, louder one had taken its place. But something was bothering him, something he could not explain. It started about a month after they returned from the Valley of Stones. Samir was going through another box of his grandfather's papers when he found a second leather notebook. This one was smaller than the first and was hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the top shelf of the study. The book's title was A History of Desert Winds. But when Samir opened it, the pages inside had been cut out to make space for the little notebook. His grandfather had hidden it on purpose. Samir opened the notebook carefully. The pages were thin and yellowed. The handwriting was the same neat script as the first notebook, but the ink was darker, and not as if Hassan had pressed the pen harder while writing. The very first line made Samir sit down. The treasury was not the real secret. There is something else beneath it. Samir read the line 3 times. He turned the page. His grandfather had written in short, urgent sentences, very different from the calm and detailed writing in the first notebook. This writing felt rushed, almost panicked. When we entered the cave in 1971, I noticed something the others did not. Behind the stone table where the crown sat, there was a second passage. It was narrow and hidden by shadows. The others were too busy looking at the gold, but I saw it. I walked to the back of the room and looked inside. The passage went down, deep into the earth. There were stairs carved into the rock. Old stairs, much older than the cave itself. I wanted to go down, but Tariq's men arrived and told us to leave. I never got the chance. Samir's hands were shaking again, just like they had when he found the first map. He kept reading. I have spent years researching what might be below the treasury. The old texts speak of 2 levels. The upper level holds the king's gold, his worldly wealth, but the lower level holds something far more valuable. The texts call it the Library of Dawood, a collection of ancient scrolls, books, and records from the king's time. Knowledge about medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and languages that the world has forgotten. If this library exists, it would change everything we know about ancient civilizations. Samir closed the notebook and stared at the wall. A hidden library beneath the treasury. Ancient knowledge buried under the earth for 1,000 years. His grandfather had known about it but had never been able to go back and look. He called Nadia immediately. She arrived within 2 hours, driving fast from the city. When she read the notebook, she paced back and forth across the study, running her hands through her short hair. A library, she kept saying. An ancient library. Do you understand what this means? The gold and the crown are valuable, yes, but they are just objects. A library from that era would contain knowledge, written records, history that no one alive today has ever read. This could fill gaps in our understanding of an entire civilization. But we do not even know if it is real, Samir said. My grandfather never went down those stairs. He only saw the passage. Then we go back and find out. Samir knew she would say that, and he knew he would agree. But this time things would be different. They could not just walk into the valley like before. The site was now under the protection of the National Archaeological Team. There were researchers, guards, and equipment there. They would need permission. Nadia made phone calls all evening. She spoke with her colleagues at the museum, with the head of the university's archaeology department, and with government officials who controlled access to the site. Most of them were excited but cautious. A hidden passage beneath the treasury was a serious claim, and they wanted proof before sending a team. The only proof Samir had was his grandfather's notebook. For some people, that was enough. For others, it was not. But there was one person whose opinion mattered most: Tariq. Samir called the satellite phone number that Tariq had given him before they parted. The old guardian answered after many rings. His voice was the same, calm, steady, and deep. I was wondering when you would call, Tariq said. You knew about the passage? Samir asked. There was a long pause. I know many things that I have not yet shared, Tariq said carefully. Our duty was to protect the treasury. But yes, we have always known there was something below. The old stories call it the Room of Words. No one from our families has ever gone down there. It was forbidden. The general who gave us our duty said that the upper chamber was to be guarded, but the lower chamber was to be left alone until a scholar came who could understand what was inside. A scholar, Samir repeated. Your grandfather was that scholar. But the time was not right then. Perhaps it is right now. 2 weeks later, Samir and Nadia returned to the Valley of Stones. This time, they did not travel alone. With them was a small team from the university, 2 archaeologists, a language expert, and a photographer. Tariq and his son met them at the entrance to the valley. The red mountains looked the same, tall, silent, and ancient. But the valley itself had changed. There were now tents, solar panels, and research stations set up near the lake. The standing stones had small markers beside them, each one numbered and cataloged. They walked together to the cave behind the waterfall. The main chamber looked exactly as Samir remembered it. The wooden boxes, the gold, the crown, now all carefully covered with protective sheets. But Samir was not looking at the treasure this time. He walked straight to the back of the room, past the stone table, to the dark corner where the shadows were deepest. And there it was, just as his grandfather had described. A narrow opening in the rock wall, barely wide enough for one person. Beyond it, stone stairs going down into blackness. Nadia came up beside him and shone her flashlight into the passage. The beam disappeared into the darkness below. Cold air came up from the opening, carrying a smell that was different from the upper cave. Drier, older, like paper and dust. Are you ready? She asked. Samir looked at the stairs. Somewhere down there, in the darkness beneath 1,000 years of silence, a lost library was waiting. His grandfather's greatest dream, the real secret of King Dawood. He took a deep breath and put his foot on the first step. And let us find out what the king was really protecting, he said, and they began to walk down.